What's up guys, it's your coach 101 from 101 Kilo Fitness. Today's video I'm going to talk about the number one factor that's a cause of stubborn belly fat and what to do to fix it. Before we start in the video, I want to teach you guys how to increase your testosterone levels naturally. If you click on the link below in the description box below the video where it says download your free report, you'll get a link right next to it. Click on that link, it'll take you to a download page and you enter your name, email address, and then I'll send you your free report that I'll put together for you. So you all know about the benefits of testosterone. There's no need for me to go over it again. Alright, so whenever we want to lose fat, whenever we want to build muscle, whenever we want to do anything, we are governed by hormones. Okay, we've got to create an optimal hormone environment in order to do either of these two. There are many hormones that we can talk about, but in relation to this, we're going to talk about one in particular, and that's insulin. So insulin is basically released from the pancreas in relation to the amount of glucose in your blood. It also transports the glucose into your cells, or rather deposits it into your cells. Okay, so we say that insulin has two primary roles: to stabilize blood glucose and also to deposit glucose into cells. All right. So when you let's just do a simplified version of what happens when you eat a meal containing carbohydrates. This is your normal fasting insulin levels. When you eat a meal with carbohydrates, it goes up. Okay, you get a big spike, and then it comes down after clearing all the glucose from the blood, and it goes back to normal again. So this is what happens to normal individuals. Now, if you've ever been in the gym, you've often heard the guys, the bros, the bodybuilders always talk about spiking insulin. What they're referring to is spiking in insulin before the workout. And there's a lot of debate about whether to spike the insulin before the workout, after the workout, or both. For me personally, I've talked about it in my Fit and Lean Dad Fat Loss Blueprint. Now, I prefer to, or rather, I encourage people to eat a breakfast full of protein and fats, because it stabilizes blood sugar, it gives you more energy, and whenever there's a presence, whenever there's a presence of insulin in the blood, fat burning stops. Alright, so if you ever go to bodybuilder.com forums, you find hundreds, if not thousands, of threads about insulin, kind of spiking insulin. So what happens when you spike your insulin levels too often? You eat too many carbohydrates too often without a need for them, you develop a condition called insulin resistance. So what happens when you are insulin sensitivity is the opposite of insulin resistance, and it refers to how well your body can utilize carbohydrates. How well it can handle carbs. What happens when you're insulin sensitive is you release less amount of insulin to clear the sugar from the blood. However, when you spike your insulin too often, you become insulin resistant. So insulin resistance is the complete opposite. You need more glucose, more insulin is released. Is released to clear. What also happens, you have higher basal levels of insulin. So basically, if we draw another simplified diagram, This is a normal insulin sensitive individual, so let's just put insulin sensitive, and then we put the insulin resistance. So as you can see, you've got higher levels of glucose. So if we do the insulin resistant person who've got a high amount of glucose, when you eat a meal containing carbohydrates, the insulin levels go up, and then they kind of stay elevated for longer, and then they come down and they stay elevated, and they stay kind of more, they're elevated for longer than somebody who's insulin sensitive. Basically, the whole reason for it is that the cells become resistant to insulin. So if you think about insulin as the gatekeeper, or your cells are the gatekeeper, so the insulin is knocking on the door to try and open the cells, and the cells are not listening. The cells are they've gone deaf. This is exactly what happens. They're not realizing the amount that there's insulin. So what happens is your insulin levels have to remain higher. They have to release more and more insulin. And then eventually what happens is they cannot detect any more insulin, so you get their condition called hyperinsulinemia, when your blood sugar becomes too high. So that's the whole role of insulin, stabilize your blood sugar. You don't want it to go too high, you don't want it to go too low. If it goes too high, basically you'll start to develop a condition called diabetes, and then you have all sorts of different illnesses. So it's really important to develop insulin sensitivity rather than insulin resistance. All right. So different tissues can develop different amounts of insulin resistance. That starts with the muscle cells, and then the fat cells will always be last. So insulin resistant, we talked about insulin resistant people who have higher amounts of basal insulin levels. Also, insulin upregulates the lipoprotein lipase, which is the fat storage hormone. So basically you'll have high levels of LPL, lipoprotein lipase, LPL, and then lower levels of hormones, sensitive lipase, which they basically takes the fat from the cells and uses it as energy with the assistance of the hormone glucagon. All right, so carbs are not the only reason why people develop insulin resistance. There can be all sorts of things, ranging from lack of omega-3. What comes from omega-3 fatty acids comes from fatty fish such as sardines and salmon. It can be because of fructose, the sugar from the fruit, generally not the fruit itself, but fruit juices. They have high fructose corn syrup. We talked about that in previous video. You can be deficient in vitamin D, which is from the sunlight. All right, so typically individuals in colder countries might be at a higher risk because they got lower levels of vitamin D. But you can supplement with these. I don't know how effective the supplements are at giving you levels of vitamin D. So that's something for your doctor to talk about. You can also be deficient in magnesium. Again, you can have high amounts of metabolites. You can have inflammation. Genetics play a big part of insulin resistance, as well as lack of mobility. So if you're always sitting around in the car or in the office and consuming high amounts of carbohydrates, there's no way for the glycogen levels to go, so they're going to spill into your fat stores, and what happens is your fat cells start to increase and multiply. So I'm going to give you two ways to basically increase your insulin resistance, insulin sensitivity rather. One is to reduce stress. Whenever you release cortisol, it's a stress hormones, and all bodily functions, bar the most essential ones, stop to try and deal with the stress. All right. Secondly, is use carbohydrates when your body needs it most, and that's in and around your workout. So I mentioned it before in previous videos, also in my Fit and Lean Dad Fat Loss Blueprint, that you only need a certain amount of carbohydrates, and you need them when your body needs it most. So don't go around and just keep consuming carbohydrates, because your body will need other nutrients. If you're going to have more carbohydrates, you're going to have to eat less of other nutrients. One final point, whenever you're insulin sensitive, your body will be able to partition the nutrients better. So when you want to build muscle, you got higher insulin sensitivity, the body's going to detect insulin levels, and those nutrients are going to go to your cells, which are going to be transported to your muscle cells rather than your fat cells. Alright guys, so leave me a comment and let me know what video you want me to do next, and I'll do my best. Leave me a thumbs up if you found this video helpful, and don't forget to download your free report.